Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the moments we least expect them. What happens when privilege meets duty, when entitlement crashes into honor, and when a simple act of disrespect becomes the catalyst for a transformation that no one saw coming. This is the story of Karen Mitchell, a woman who thought the world owed her everything, and a royal guard who taught her that respect isn't given, it's earned. What began as an ordinary Tuesday morning in London would become a day that changed not just one person's perspective, but touched the lives of everyone who witnessed what unfolded. You're about to discover how a piece of trash, thrown in anger, became the beginning of the most important lesson Karen would ever learn. This isn't just a story about consequences. It's about the power of dignity, the weight of responsibility, and the incredible things that happened when someone finally understands what it truly means to serve others. Get ready for a journey that will make you question everything you think you know about respect, service, and the hidden strength that lies within the most unexpected people. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as tourists began their daily pilgrimage to catch a glimpse of the famous royal guards. Among the crowd, Karen Mitchell stood out not for her appearance, but for the storm cloud that seemed to follow her wherever she went. At 42, Karen had perfected the art of finding fault with everything and everyone around her. Her perfectly styled blonde hair, designer handbag, and expensive shoes spoke of a life of comfort, but her perpetually pursed lips and critical gaze revealed a woman who had never learned to appreciate what she had. Karen had arrived in London 3 days earlier for what was supposed to be a luxury vacation with her husband, Richard. The trip had been his idea, a peace offering after months of tension in their marriage. But from the moment they stepped off the plane, nothing had met Karen's impossibly high standards. The hotel room wasn't large enough, the weather was too cloudy, the food was too bland, and the people were too polite for her liking. She missed the aggressive efficiency of New York, where she could demand immediate satisfaction and usually get it. Standing before the iconic red uniform guards, Karen felt her irritation reach a boiling point. She had been waiting for over an hour to get the perfect photograph, but tourists kept walking in front of her camera. The guards, standing motionless in their traditional bearskin hats and pristine red tunics, seemed to mock her with their serene composure. To Karen, they were nothing more than tourist attractions, living statues put there for her entertainment. Richard had wandered off to buy postcards, leaving Karen alone with her growing frustration. She pulled out her phone and began recording a video for her social media followers, ready to complain about yet another disappointing experience. "So here I am at Buckingham Palace," she said to her phone camera, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And these guards are supposed to be some big deal, but honestly, they're just standing there doing nothing. I don't understand what all the fuss is about." What Karen didn't understand, and had made no effort to learn, was that she was looking at members of the British Army's Household Division, soldiers who had earned their position through rigorous training and unwavering dedication. The guard directly in front of her, Lance Corporal James Harrison, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for this prestigious posting. His perfect posture and unwavering gaze weren't for show. They were the result of years of discipline and a deep sense of duty that Karen could never comprehend. As Karen continued her critical commentary, a group of schoolchildren on a field trip approached with their teacher. The children, aged around 8 or 9, gazed up at the guards with wonder and respect. Their teacher, Mrs. Peterson, quietly explained the significance of the guard's role and the importance of showing respect for those who serve their country. Karen rolled her eyes at what she saw as unnecessary reverence for glorified security guards. "Excuse me," Karen called out loudly, interrupting the teacher's explanation. "Can you move your kids? I'm trying to get a photo here." Mrs. Peterson politely explained that they would only be a few more minutes, as this was an educational visit for the children. Karen's face flushed red with anger. "I don't care about your field trip. I paid good money to be here, and I shouldn't have to wait for a bunch of kids." The children looked confused and hurt by Karen's harsh words, but Mrs. Peterson maintained her composure and gently guided them to a different area. However, the damage was done. Karen's outburst had drawn the attention of other tourists, who began whispering among themselves about the rude American woman who couldn't show basic courtesy to children. Feeling embarrassed, but refusing to acknowledge her inappropriate behavior, Karen's anger intensified. She focused her resentment on the guards, who continued to stand perfectly still despite the commotion she had caused. In her mind, their silence was a sign of weakness rather than professionalism. She had no idea that Lance Corporal Harrison had witnessed her treatment of the children and was struggling to maintain his composure while remaining true to his duty. Karen finished her coffee and, in a moment of pure spite, decided to make her own statement about what she perceived as the guards' uselessness. She looked around for a trash bin, but couldn't find one immediately nearby. Instead of walking a few extra steps to properly dispose of her empty cup, she made a decision that would change the course of her entire trip. With deliberate malice, Karen tossed her empty coffee cup directly at Lance Corporal Harrison. The cup struck his pristine red tunic before bouncing onto the ground, leaving a small stain on his uniform. The crowd around her gasped in shock. Children pointed, adults whispered, and several people began recording the incident on their phones. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Lance Corporal Harrison remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead as he had been trained to do. But something had changed in the air around them. The casual chatter of tourists faded to uncomfortable silence as people realized they had witnessed something truly inappropriate. Karen stood there with a satisfied smirk on her face, feeling vindicated for all the minor inconveniences she had experienced during her trip. She expected the guard to break character, to acknowledge her presence, to give her some reaction that would confirm her belief that she had power over him. Instead, he remained perfectly still, maintaining his post with the same dignity he had shown all morning. What Karen didn't notice was the subtle shift in the crowd around her. The other tourists were no longer focused on the guards. They were focused on her. Disapproving stares bore into her from all directions, and she began to feel uncomfortable under their judgment. An elderly British gentleman stepped forward and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of decades. "Madam," he said quietly but firmly, "do you have any idea what you just done?" His words weren't shouted or aggressive, but they carried an authority that made Karen take a step back. The man's military bearing and the medals on his jacket suggested he was a veteran himself, someone who understood the significance of what had just occurred. Karen tried to maintain her defiant attitude. "I threw away some trash," she said with a shrug. "It's not like I hurt anyone. He's just standing there anyway." Her words rang hollow in the silence that followed, and for the first time, she began to feel a flicker of doubt about her actions. The elderly veteran shook his head sadly. "That trash landed on a soldier who has served his country with honor. That man you just disrespected has likely seen combat, has put his life on the line for people he's never met, and stands here as a symbol of duty and service that clearly means nothing to you." Other people in the crowd began to voice their agreement with the veteran's words. Karen found herself surrounded by disapproval, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down on her behavior. "Look, I don't know what the big deal is," she said loudly. "He's getting paid to stand there and look pretty for tourists. If he can't handle a little trash, maybe he should find a different job." Her words sparked outrage among the British tourists, who began explaining to her the history and significance of the Royal Guards. They told her about the requirements to become a guard, the training involved, and the honor associated with the position. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too busy feeling attacked and defensive to absorb any of the information being shared with her. As the situation escalated, Karen noticed that Lance Corporal Harrison still hadn't moved or acknowledged what had happened. His continued professionalism in the face of her disrespect began to annoy her even more. She had expected a reaction, some sign that she had affected him, but he remained as steady and composed as he had been all morning. Richard returned from his postcard shopping to find his wife at the center of a heated discussion with a group of angry tourists. He quickly assessed the situation and tried to defuse it by apologizing on Karen's behalf and attempting to lead her away. But Karen wasn't ready to leave. She felt that she was being unfairly criticized for what she saw as a minor incident. "This is ridiculous," she announced to the crowd. "You people act like I committed a crime. It was just a cup, and he's just doing his job." Her inability to understand the gravity of her actions only fueled the crowd's disapproval, and Richard found himself apologizing more profusely as he tried to extract his wife from the situation. As they walked away, Karen could hear the continued discussions behind her. People were sharing stories about the sacrifices made by military personnel, the honor of serving one's country, and the importance of showing respect for those who protect society. But, in her mind, these were all overreactions to a simple mistake. What Karen didn't realize was that her actions had been captured on multiple phones and cameras. In the age of social media, her moment of disrespect would soon be shared with the world, bringing consequences she never could have imagined. The coffee cup she had thrown so carelessly would become a symbol of entitlement and disrespect that would follow her long after she left London. As she and Richard walked back to their hotel, Karen remained convinced that she had been treated unfairly. She couldn't understand why people had reacted so strongly to what she saw as a minor incident. In her world, service workers were there to serve her, and if they couldn't handle a little disrespect, that was their problem, not hers. But the seed of doubt that had been planted by the veteran's words continued to grow in the back of her mind. For the first time in her life, Karen Mitchell was about to discover that actions have consequences and that the world doesn't revolve around her comfort and convenience. The lesson was just beginning, and it would prove to be more powerful and life-changing than anything she could have imagined. The rest of their walk back to the hotel passed in tense silence, with Richard occasionally glancing at his wife with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. He had seen this pattern before: Karen's inability to take responsibility for her actions and her tendency to blame others for her problems. But something about this incident felt different, more serious than her usual complaints about poor service or inconvenience. As they reached their hotel room, Karen finally spoke. "I don't understand what everyone was so upset about," she said, settling into the room's armchair with a frustrated sigh. "It's not like I was trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted to make a point about how useless those guards are." Richard looked at his wife with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. After 20 years of marriage, he had watched Karen's sense of entitlement grow steadily worse, but this was the first time he had seen her show such blatant disrespect to someone in uniform. His own father had been a veteran, and he understood the significance of what Karen had done in a way that she clearly didn't. "Karen," he said gently, "I think you need to understand that what you did today was really inappropriate. Those guards aren't just for decoration. They're real soldiers with real responsibilities." But Karen wasn't ready to hear it. She was still too caught up in her own sense of being wronged to consider that she might have been the one in the wrong. As she settled in for what she expected to be a peaceful afternoon, she had no idea that her morning's actions were about to catch up with her in ways she never could have anticipated. The story of Karen's encounter with the Royal Guard was just beginning, and the lessons that lay ahead would test everything she thought she knew about respect, service, and what it truly means to serve others. The coffee cup had been thrown, but the real impact was yet to come. Karen woke up the next morning to find Richard staring at his phone with a grim expression on his face. She stretched lazily in the hotel bed, already mentally preparing her list of complaints about the breakfast they would soon encounter downstairs. The previous day's incident had faded from her mind overnight, dismissed as just another example of British overreaction to a minor situation. "Karen," Richard said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "You need to see this." He held up his phone, and Karen squinted at the screen without much interest. What she saw made her blood run cold. There, in vivid detail, was a video of her throwing the coffee cup at the Royal Guard. The footage, shot by multiple tourists, had been compiled into a clear narrative that left no doubt about what had happened. The video showed her dismissive treatment of the school children, her rude demands for people to move out of her way, and finally, the moment when she deliberately threw her cup at Lance Corporal Harrison. But that wasn't the worst part. The video had gone viral overnight, shared thousands of times across social media platforms with captions that made Karen's stomach drop. Entitled "American Tourist Disrespects Royal Guard," read one. "The ugly American tourist everyone hates," proclaimed another. "Woman shows ultimate disrespect to British soldier," declared a third. Karen's hands trembled as Richard showed her comment after comment from people around the world expressing their disgust at her behavior. The video had been shared not just by individual users, but by news outlets, military appreciation pages, and social justice advocates. In less than 24 hours, Karen Mitchell had become the face of everything people despised about entitled, disrespectful tourists. "This can't be happening," she whispered, scrolling through the endless stream of negative comments. People were calling for her to be banned from the UK, demanding that she apologize publicly, and sharing stories about their own military family members who deserved better treatment than what she had shown. The comments weren't just criticism, they were education. Person after person explained the significance of the Royal Guards, sharing facts that Karen had never bothered to learn. She discovered that Lance Corporal Harrison, the guard she had targeted, was a decorated veteran who had served multiple tours in dangerous locations. Other users shared information about the rigorous selection process for Royal Guards, the physical and mental demands of the job, and the deep honor associated with protecting the monarchy and serving the British people. As Karen read these comments, a sick feeling began to settle in her stomach. For the first time, she was beginning to understand that her actions hadn't just been rude, they had been profoundly disrespectful to someone who had dedicated his life to serving others. The guard she had seen as nothing more than a tourist attraction was actually a highly trained soldier who had likely faced dangers she couldn't imagine. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his face pale with embarrassment and concern. "Karen, this is serious," he said. "People are calling the hotel. They've figured out where we're staying. The front desk called this morning. They've had dozens of complaints about our presence here." The reality of the situation began to hit Karen like a physical blow. This wasn't just going to go away. Her moment of spite had been captured forever, shared with the world, and now she was facing consequences she had never imagined possible. In her comfortable life back home, she had always been able to demand her way out of uncomfortable situations. Money, influence, and sheer persistence had always been enough to solve her problems. But this was different. "What are people saying about me?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Richard hesitated, then began reading some of the milder comments aloud. Even the least harsh criticism was devastating to Karen's self-image. People described her as entitled, disrespectful, ignorant, and embarrassing. Many comments included stories from veterans and military families who felt personally insulted by her actions. One comment that particularly stung came from a British veteran who had served alongside American forces in Afghanistan. "This woman doesn't represent the Americans I've had the honor to serve with," he had written. "Those men and women showed the same respect for our traditions that we showed for theirs. This is just pure ignorance and entitlement, and it's heartbreaking to see someone treat our guards with such disrespect." Karen found herself crying for the first time in years, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of shame and fear. The comfortable bubble of entitlement she had lived in her entire life was bursting around her, and she didn't know how to handle the exposure to real consequences for her actions. "We need to leave London," she said suddenly. "We need to go home right now." But Richard shook his head slowly. He had been doing some research of his own while Karen slept, and he had discovered something that made leaving impossible. "Karen, I've been looking into this, and I think we need to stay," he said carefully. "I found some articles about Lance Corporal Harrison, the guard you threw the cup at. He's not just any soldier. He's received multiple commendations for bravery. He saved the lives of 3 fellow soldiers in Afghanistan, and he's been selected as an honor guard for several state functions." The weight of this information hit Karen like a physical blow. She had targeted not just any soldier, but someone who had proven himself to be truly heroic. The contrast between his service and sacrifice and her petty, entitled behavior was stark and undeniable. Richard continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I think you need to apologize, Karen. Not just a quick sorry, but a real apology. You need to understand what you did and make it right. The suggestion sent Karen into a panic. The idea of facing Lance Corporal Harrison, of admitting she was wrong, of showing vulnerability and humility went against every instinct she had developed over 42 years of life. She had built her identity around being right, around demanding respect rather than earning it, and around never backing down from a confrontation. I can't do that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't face him. What would I even say? For the first time, Karen was confronting the possibility that her actions had real impact on real people, that her behavior had consequences beyond her own comfort and convenience. As the morning progressed, the situation only got worse. The hotel manager knocked on their door to inform them that other guests had complained about their presence, and that the media had begun calling for interviews. Karen's social media accounts were flooded with messages ranging from angry condemnation to disappointed education about military service and respect. But among all the criticism, there were also unexpected voices. Some people shared their own stories of learning from mistakes, of growing, and changing after moments of poor judgment. These messages weren't excusing Karen's behavior, but they offered hope that people could learn and grow from their worst moments. One message that stood out came from former military spouse who had written, I used to take my husband's service for granted until I really understood what he went through. Sometimes it takes a wake-up call to make us see what we've been blind to. The question now is what you'll do with this opportunity to learn and grow. As Karen read these more compassionate responses, she began to feel something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine remorse. Not the defensive anger she usually felt when criticized, but real sadness about the pain her actions had caused. For the first time, she was seeing Lance Corporal Harrison not as an obstacle to her perfect photo, but as a real person who had dedicated his life to serving others. Richard spent the afternoon researching military charities and veterans organizations, trying to find constructive ways for Karen to channel her growing remorse into positive action. He discovered that Lance Corporal Harrison was involved with a charity that helped injured veterans, and he gently suggested that Karen might consider making a donation as part of any apology. But Karen was still struggling with the basic concept of apologizing. She had spent so many years being defensive about her behavior that the idea of admitting fault felt foreign and terrifying. The thought of facing Lance Corporal Harrison, of looking into the eyes of someone she had disrespected, made her feel physically sick. As evening approached, Karen made a decision that surprised even herself. She asked Richard to help her research Lance Corporal Harrison's military service, not to find ammunition for her own defense, but to truly understand who she had disrespected. What she learned transformed her understanding of the situation completely. James Harrison had enlisted at 18, motivated by a desire to serve his country after losing his father in a construction accident. He had excelled in training and had been deployed to Afghanistan as part of a peacekeeping mission. During his second tour, his unit had come under attack, and Harrison had risked his own life to pull 3 wounded soldiers to safety while under enemy fire. He had been awarded the Military Cross for his bravery. After his combat service, Harrison had applied to become a Royal Guard, a position that required not just military excellence, but also the mental discipline to maintain composure under pressure. The role wasn't ceremonial. It was a real military posting with real responsibilities. The guards were active soldiers who could be called upon for various duties, and their presence at Buckingham Palace was part of an actual security operation. As Karen learned these details, she began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. She hadn't just been rude to a performer or a tourist attraction. She had disrespected a genuine hero, someone who had risked everything for others and who continued to serve with honor and dignity. The transformation in Karen's thinking wasn't immediate or easy. Years of entitlement and self-centeredness don't disappear overnight. But for the first time in her life, she was confronting the reality that other people's experiences, sacrifices, and feelings mattered as much as her own comfort and convenience. That night, as she lay awake in the hotel bed listening to Richard's steady breathing, Karen made a decision that would mark the beginning of the most important change in her life. She would find a way to apologize to Lance Corporal Harrison, not just with words, but with actions that demonstrated genuine understanding and respect. She didn't yet know how she would find the courage to face him or what she could possibly say to make amends for her behavior. But for the first time since throwing that coffee cup, Karen Mitchell was thinking about someone other than herself. The lesson was beginning to take hold, and the woman who woke up the next morning would be different from the one who had fallen asleep. Karen woke up on the third morning with a resolve she hadn't felt in decades. The sleepless nights, the crushing weight of public shame, and the gradual understanding of who Lance Corporal Harrison really was had fundamentally changed something inside her. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could try to make it right. Richard found her sitting at the small hotel desk, writing by hand on hotel stationery. Her usual perfect appearance was abandoned. Her hair was pulled back simply. She wore no makeup, and her expensive clothes had been replaced with modest jeans and a plain sweater. The woman who had always demanded attention now seemed to be trying to disappear. "What are you writing?" Richard asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. He had been watching his wife's transformation with a mixture of hope and concern, unsure whether this change would last or if it was just a temporary reaction to public embarrassment. "A letter," Karen said without looking up. "I need to apologize properly, and I don't trust myself to say the right things in person. I need to think it through carefully." Her handwriting, usually confident and bold, was careful and uncertain. She had started the letter dozens of times, crumpling up false starts and beginning again. The letter was unlike anything Karen had ever written. Gone were the demands, the assumptions of superiority, and the casual dismissal of others' feelings. Instead, she wrote with genuine humility about her actions and their impact. She acknowledged that she had been ignorant about the significance of Lance Corporal Harrison's role and service. She admitted that her behavior had been inexcusable and that she was deeply ashamed of how she had treated not just him, but everyone around her that day. But the letter was more than just an apology. Karen had spent the previous day learning about military service, reading stories of sacrifice and dedication that had never interested her before. She wrote about how these stories had opened her eyes to a world of service and honor that she had been blind to her entire life. She acknowledged that her apology could never undo the disrespect she had shown, but she hoped it might be a first step toward understanding and growth. While Karen worked on her letter, Richard made phone calls to the charity Lance Corporal Harrison supported. He learned that the organization helped veterans transition to civilian life and provided support for wounded soldiers and their families. Without telling Karen, he arranged for a significant donation to be made in both their names, hoping it might demonstrate that their remorse was backed by meaningful action. When Karen finally finished her letter, she read it aloud to Richard. Her voice shook as she reached the most difficult part. "I understand now that when I threw that cup at you, I wasn't just being rude to a person doing their job. I was disrespecting someone who has risked his life for others, someone who represents the best of what it means to serve. I have spent my life taking for granted the freedoms and security that people like you have sacrificed to protect." The next challenge was figuring out how to deliver the letter. They couldn't simply walk up to Lance Corporal Harrison while he was on duty. That would be another disruption of his professional responsibilities. After several phone calls, Richard discovered that letters for Royal Guards could be delivered through proper military channels, ensuring they would reach their intended recipient without creating another public spectacle. But Karen wasn't satisfied with just sending a letter. She felt compelled to do something more, something that would demonstrate her understanding of what service really meant. That afternoon, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Karen and Richard visited the charity that Lance Corporal Harrison supported. The organization was located in a modest building in central London, staffed by volunteers who were themselves military veterans or family members. When Karen walked through the doors, she wasn't sure what to expect, but she was committed to learning and helping however she could. The director, a former Royal Marine named Sarah Thompson, recognized Karen immediately from the viral video. But instead of showing anger or judgment, she welcomed Karen with cautious professionalism. "I understand you'd like to volunteer," she said simply. "Can I ask what's motivated this interest?" For the first time since the incident, Karen told her story completely honestly. She described her behavior, her ignorance about military service, and the shame and learning that had followed. She didn't try to make excuses or minimize what she had done. Instead, she focused on her desire to understand and contribute to something meaningful. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped Karen articulate her new understanding. When Karen finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "We've had people come here after viral incidents before," she said finally. "Most of them are looking for a quick photo opportunity to repair their image." "What makes you different?" Karen thought carefully before answering. "I don't want a photo opportunity," she said. "I don't want this to be about repairing my image. I want to learn what service really means, and I want to contribute to something bigger than my own comfort and convenience." Sarah studied Karen's face, looking for signs of insincerity or hidden motives. What she saw was genuine humility and a willingness to be uncomfortable in service of learning. After another long moment, she nodded. "We can use help with some of our administrative work," she said. "It's not glamorous, but it's necessary." Karen spent the rest of the afternoon doing data entry, organizing files, and helping prepare care packages for wounded veterans. The work was tedious and unglamorous, exactly the kind of task she would normally have considered beneath her. But for the first time in years, Karen felt like she was contributing something meaningful rather than just consuming services and attention. As she worked, Karen listened to the stories of other volunteers. She met Margaret, whose son had been killed in action and who now dedicated her time to helping other military families. She met David, a veteran who had lost his leg in combat and now used his experience to counsel other wounded soldiers. She met Elena, a military spouse who organized support networks for families during deployments. Each story expanded Karen's understanding of what sacrifice really meant. These weren't abstract concepts or news stories. They were real people who had given pieces of themselves in service of others. The contrast with her own life of privilege and complaint was stark and humbling. When the workday ended, Sarah approached Karen with an unexpected offer. "Lance Corporal Harrison sometimes volunteers here on his days off," she said quietly. "If you're serious about apologizing, and if you're willing to do so without cameras or publicity, I might be able to arrange a meeting." Karen's heart pounded at the prospect. After days of building up the courage to face her victim, she was being offered the opportunity to do so. But the fear was overwhelming. What could she possibly say to someone she had disrespected so publicly? How could she face the judgment in his eyes? "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say to him." Sarah nodded understandingly. "The fact that you're nervous about it is a good sign," she said. "People who've done wrong and don't feel nervous about facing their victims usually aren't truly sorry." That evening, Karen and Richard walked through London streets, both lost in thought about the transformation they had witnessed in Karen over the past few days. The city that had seemed foreign and inconvenient just a week earlier now felt different to Karen. She noticed things she had been blind to before. The memorials to fallen soldiers, the subtle signs of respect for military service, the quiet dignity of people going about their daily lives without demanding special treatment. "I've been thinking about home," Karen said as they paused on a bridge overlooking the Thames. "About how I've been living my life. I don't like who I was before this happened." Richard took her hand, something he hadn't done spontaneously in years. "You're learning," he said simply. That's what matters now. The next morning brought unexpected news. Sarah called to inform them that Lance Corporal Harrison had agreed to meet with Karen, but only under specific conditions. The meeting would be private, with no media or recording devices allowed. It would take place at the charity office, and Sarah would be present to facilitate the conversation. Most importantly, Karen was not to expect forgiveness. Lance Corporal Harrison was agreeing to listen, nothing more. Karen spent the morning preparing for what felt like the most important conversation of her life. She reviewed her letter one final time, but she also prepared herself for the possibility that her words might not be enough. She had learned enough about military service to understand that respect had to be earned through actions, not just expressed through words. When Lance Corporal Harrison arrived at the charity office that afternoon, Karen was struck by how young he looked out of uniform. Dressed in casual clothes, James Harrison appeared to be in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that spoke of someone comfortable with himself and his choices. The contrast with her own decades of dissatisfaction and complaint was immediate and painful. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Karen began, her carefully prepared words falling away as she faced the reality of the person she had wronged. "I know I don't deserve your time or attention, but I needed you to know how sorry I am for what I did." James listened quietly as Karen read her letter, occasionally nodding but showing little emotion. When she finished, there was a long silence before he spoke. "I appreciate your apology," he said quietly. "I can see that you've learned something from this experience. But I need you to understand that this isn't really about me." Karen looked confused, and James continued. "When you threw that cup, you weren't just disrespecting me personally. You were showing disrespect for everyone who serves, everyone who sacrifices for something bigger than themselves. The hurt you cause goes beyond one soldier to all the families who've lost someone in service, all the veterans who struggle with their injuries, all the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others." The weight of his words settled over Karen like a heavy blanket. She had thought her apology was about making things right between herself and one soldier, but James was helping her understand that her actions had symbolic weight far beyond their personal interaction. "What can I do?" she asked, genuine desperation in her voice. "How can I make this right?" James was quiet for another long moment before answering. "You can't make it right," he said gently but firmly, "but you can use this experience to become someone who understands what service means, someone who respects the sacrifices others make." He gestured around the charity office, where other volunteers were quietly working to support veterans and their families. "You can continue to learn, continue to contribute, continue to grow. That's how you honor the people you disrespected with your actions." Before leaving, James offered Karen one final piece of wisdom that would stay with her forever. "The uniform I wear isn't about me," he said. "It represents something bigger: duty, honor, service to others. When you showed disrespect to that uniform, you were showing disrespect to those ideals. If you really want to make amends, live those ideals in your own life." As Karen watched James leave, she felt a profound shift in her understanding of herself and the world around her. The lesson she had learned wasn't just about respecting military service. It was about recognizing the difference between entitlement and earning, between demanding respect and deserving it, between living for yourself and living for something bigger. Over the following weeks, Karen extended her stay in London to continue volunteering with the charity. She learned to find satisfaction in anonymous service, in contributing without seeking recognition or reward. She discovered that the fulfillment that had always eluded her in her life of luxury and complaint could be found in the simple act of helping others. When she finally returned home to New York, Karen carried with her not just the shame of her viral moment, but the transformative power of understanding what it truly means to serve. She established a foundation to support military families, not for publicity or tax benefits, but because she had learned that the greatest satisfaction comes from contributing to something beyond yourself. The coffee cup she had thrown in a moment of spite had become the catalyst for the most important learning of her life. Lance Corporal Harrison's quiet dignity in the face of her disrespect had taught her more about strength, honor, and service than all her years of privilege ever could. Karen Mitchell learned that respect isn't given freely. It's earned through actions that demonstrate understanding of what's truly important. The lesson was priceless not because it was expensive, but because it transformed a life that had been focused on taking into one dedicated to giving. And in that transformation, she discovered that the person she became was far more valuable than the person she had been.